Welcome, everyone, to a new episode on the Living Life Naturally podcast. We're thrilled to have you here with us today. And just as a reminder, I am doing free calls for people who are interested. You'll see it in the show notes. If you have some kind of problem with midlife, then I would love to be able to discuss that or your menopausal situation. So just grab the link in our show notes. And today I'm thrilled to have with me a fellow Brit. And so she is here to talk to us about things to do with weight loss when we might hit midlife or perimenopause. And so I want to introduce you to Louise Digby. She's a registered nutritional therapist. She's a women's weight loss expert and the founder of the Nourish Method to lasting fat loss. Her clients come to her after struggling to lose weight despite eating well. Probably sounds very familiar to you, and working hard to burn that fat. So Louise transforms her clients' health and well-being by identifying and addressing each individual's unique needs and imbalances so that they can lose weight and optimize their health and rediscover their sparkle without restrictive dieting or the need for superhuman willpower. So welcome to our podcast today, Louise. Tell everybody where you're joining from.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. I am joining you from Essex in the UK.
Southern part of England. Yes. And reminds me so much of being home. And when I talk to people from the UK, I get quite homesick. But there you go. My dad passed a long time ago. My mum passed away a few years ago. So I have not been back in over 7 years.
Wow.
I've been to Europe, but haven't been back to the UK. As I told you, my sister's up in Scotland. So it's a little bit different going back to where home is to me. So despite having turned off my messenger, if you hear bings, that's what it is, and I apologize for it. So what I want to know, first of all, is how did you find yourself in this particular area of expertise, and what was your own journey bringing you here?
So when I graduated back in 2012, I did what most nutritionists do. I worked with everyone and anyone in terms of whatever problem they had or goal they had. Then we'd work on it. And I ended up kind of specializing more in the weight loss side of things at first, because pretty much everyone that came to me, whether they came to me for IBS or depression or eczema or whatever it was, they all also wanted to lose weight. And what I found interesting was that the people that came to me for weight loss actually didn't get as good a results as the people that came to me for other health problems, but also wanted to lose weight. So it was the people that were more focused on their health that got the best results weight loss wise, whereas the people that were more focused on just losing weight and portion control and trying to avoid the quote unquote bad foods, they didn't get such good results. So that kind of piqued my interest. And then I also noticed that it was really women who were perimenopausal and menopausal, or kind of after the age of 35, 40, that were struggling the most with their weights, but they were the most disciplined. They were the ones who were trying the hardest. So I kind of brought all that together and tried to understand why this was happening. And kind of the conclusion that I came to is that really, as we go into that phase of life, there's a lot more going on than just overeating or under-exercising. There's so much change in the body with hormones and metabolism, as well as a lifetime of factors that come into play, whether that's lots of dieting or whether it's trauma or inflammation or anything really. All of those things kind of come together to make it quite a tricky time to lose weight. So I really wanted to find a way of doing things that would be sustainable and achieve weight loss that lasts, but in a way that optimizes your health at the same time, and sets you up for really that second half of your life.
Mm. Yeah, because really it is the half of your life. You know, in years gone by, that was maybe not so, but that's why I think when we get to our 40s, early 40s, we're going through the change of life. It can be so exciting because it can be a totally new phase of life for us. So I'm sure, like me, you have to help people when they get to that age to work a little bit on their mindset, because we have such a negative experience or teaching about anything to do with menopause. And I don't know if you were brought up that way. Certainly my mother and none of my family ever talked about what it was going into perimenopause and everything that went on in your body at that time.
Yeah, it's kind of like a bit of a taboo subject, a bit
Mm,
like, asking a woman her age or asking someone how much they earn. It's not really something that's kind of
right.
talked about in polite conversation. So yeah, it's not something that I think has been talked about much anywhere up until really the past couple of years. And then there's been this explosion of awareness, which is great. But there's obviously some mixed messages out there. And, I've had clients who have been told that, oh, well, now that you're menopausal, that's it. You're not going to be able to lose any weight anymore, or it's all downhill from here. And there's all these misconceptions out there that are really damaging. And it can be quite, depressing and
Hmm.
overwhelming getting to this stage when you're starting to see those changes happen. So yeah, working on mindset is important because, like you said, it can be a really exciting time when you're
Hmm.
going into a new chapter. And, all these signs and symptoms that you get, including stubborn weight, it's your body trying to tell you something. And, I prefer to think about those symptoms as almost like a superpower, because it's your body telling you what it needs. And if we can tune into that and listen to it, then we can really optimize our health.
Yeah, and it's so freeing because I was a yo-yo dieter the whole time I lived in England. And even when I came to the States, I think I tried every fad diet out there. And it did so much harm to my body. You know, I didn't realize it. And when I became a holistic health practitioner, it kind of changed everything for me because it was looking at our body a different way. It was looking at all these pillars of health. And I think that especially for women when they get into perimenopause and menopause, there's such a lot to learn there for women. And it, as you say, it's not just about the weight loss, it's so much more that goes into it. And yeah, the mindset, when you begin to see things in a positive light, can really change you. So I want to ask you, why do those well-known diets, and you probably have a few that we don't have over here, but why do those well-known diets become less effective as we get older?
So the every diet out there, they're all really based on the premise that you're gaining weight because you're under exercising or overeating. And they're all really based on getting you into a calorie deficit one way or another. They all do it in different ways, but that's ultimately what they're doing. They're getting you into a calorie deficit. And we're kind of told that to lose weight, it is as black and white as just getting into a calorie deficit. But there is a lot more to it than that. And I think as you get into your 40s, there's a lot of changes happening in your body that have nothing to do with how many calories you're eating. So, the menopausal transition where your ovaries are starting to wind down and produce fewer sex hormones. It's a perfectly normal, natural
Mhm.
transition, but it's something that can be exacerbated by lots of other things, imbalances in the body, stress, and lifestyle factors. which can make that a more kind of turbulent time where your hormones are fluctuating a lot more. And that decline in estrogen, sometimes it can be a bit up and down, but overall there is a decline in estrogen during that time. That is something that is kind of strongly associated with this weight gain, because the drop in estrogen correlates with a loss of muscle mass, and your muscle is so important for your metabolism, because muscle tissue is metabolically active, so it burns calories even when we're not using them. So the more muscle you have, the better. The less you have, the lower your metabolic rate. So that loss of muscle mass that comes with the drop of estrogen is something that will slow down your metabolism and make it harder to lose weight. But also the decline in estrogen makes you more prone to insulin resistance.
Mm-hmm.
And insulin resistance is essentially where your cells don't kind of get the message as strongly from insulin. And insulin is really there to help control your blood sugars and sweep them away and help you to use those sugars as fuel or store it as fat. So when you're insulin resistant, you keep producing more and more insulin to kind of compensate for the fact that it's not working so well. And that is something that means that it can be really difficult for you to get into fat burning mode, because essentially insulin is a fat storage hormone. So that insulin resistance is another thing that happens that makes it more difficult to lose weight. So it's kind of a double whammy that comes with the drop in estrogen. And then at the same time, this shift from where your ovaries are producing fewer sex hormones, your adrenals, which are your stress glands, take over some of the production of your sex hormones to a degree, but not as much as the ovaries were. And essentially what that means is that your adrenals go from having to do one job of producing the stress hormones to having to produce both stress hormones and sex hormones. And what that means is that we become much less resilient to the effects of stress. So stress could be stress as we know it, kind of emotional stress, but it could also be physical stress, like under eating or over exercising or pain or lack of sleep and various other things. All things that are very common with our modern lives, but also very common when you're trying to lose weight because of dieting, and very common during this life stage because there's a lot of stress in this life stage with aging parents and having children and still working full time and all these things. So when you're exposed to that stress during this life stage, the decline in your sex hormones can happen more rapidly because your body is going to prioritize producing stress hormones. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And I think at that stage in life, because I remember I went through this, a woman has more of a tendency for adrenal fatigue than at other times. And I know I would find myself with a 3 p.m. slump at my desk when I was working in the corporate world. And that is so common for women. And that's why another reason why it's so important to really tune into your body and know your body. Begin to learn what its cues are so that you can get the help that you need.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's absolutely key because your body's really good at telling you what it needs, and we aren't very good at listening to it.
Yeah.
But if we can start tuning into it and looking at the patterns of what triggers you have, or maybe getting familiar with your cravings and when they happen, then we can learn a lot about that.
Yeah. And how do you figure out the underlying imbalances so that you can lose weight more easily?
Well, you can do a couple of things. In an ideal world, running advanced tests is great. It kind of cuts straight to the chase. So it might be assessing your hormones. It might be assessing gut health and looking at inflammation and toxic load. Those are areas that I like to look at with my clients, because those are all areas that impact your hormones and metabolism. But if testing isn't something that is accessible for you, then you can kind of look at your symptoms and see, where you might have clusters of symptoms, and that will help you to understand where you need to focus your attention. And I would try and kind of look a little bit wider than just the weight side of things, and look at kind of all symptoms, whether it's, to do with your skin or your hair or inflammation and joint pain and anything you can think of. They're all relevant symptoms, because, if you've got a cluster of gut symptoms, then of course it's going to be a sign that maybe your gut health isn't so good. And the gut is super important when it comes to your hormones and your metabolism, but also your mental well-being, which is hugely important for being able to stay consistent with making healthy choices as well. So that, that sort of thing, thinking outside the box and not just focusing on portion control, is really key. And I see gut issues in most of my clients. We always test the gut, and we almost always find some level of imbalance with bacteria and yeasts or absorption, or that sort of thing.
Yeah, it's all very interesting how so many things link back to what your gut health is. And over here, it's not so easy to get testing done to find out, because many of our doctors still don't believe that gut health has anything to do with anything in your body and what's going on. So it can be kind of tricky to deal with that. Many of the people themselves, I notice, are very open and quite well educated in the whole gut health thing. But I think that our health system over here hasn't really caught up with that. Yeah, which is a shame. But there are some things that you can do on your own. I have some great programs just for gut health that I run with people if they're having issues. And of course, also you can do a detox to clean out those toxins from your liver and from your body. And when I say detox, I'm not talking about a liquid diet for 10 days like it used to be. You can get very healthy detoxes now that are all food-based.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely key, because yes, it's really important to support your body's detoxification, but it needs to be kind of something that you might do a little bit more strictly at first, but there needs to be kind of elements that you continue in the long term, and ensure that you're continuously supporting your detoxification so that you get long-term benefits.
Yeah, absolutely. So tell me some of the common mistakes that you found that people make when they're into that perimenopausal stage, for example, probably over 40, although nowadays we're getting a lot sooner. We get a lot of women now at 35 and above. But what are some of the mistakes when they're trying to lose weight that is kind of counterproductive for them?
One of the biggest things I see is a lot of women will go in really hard on the cardio and go for those high calorie burn workouts, which tend to be things like hit training or prolonged cardio. And it kind of makes sense, because you're thinking, okay, I've got to burn those calories. But unfortunately, it can be counterproductive, because that intense exercise or that prolonged cardio can drive up your stress hormones. It's quite stressful on the body, and that's something that is not great, because we spoke before about how our resilience to stress is lower during this time and can be disruptive to our sex hormones. So a lot of women find that they dial up the exercise, but they don't see the results they would expect, or if anything, they gain weight and inflammatory symptoms get worse. So instead, focusing more on lower intensity exercise like yoga, walking, swimming, that type of thing, as well as strength training, building up that muscle and doing a combination of those things, I've found to be, really effective for most people. And it does depend on the individual. Oftentimes you can keep some cardio in, particularly if they're not super stressed or if their thyroid's, well balanced and supported, then, it can work quite well. But otherwise, it's good to have a balance of different things anyway, but maybe dial back that cardio if you are doing quite a lot of it. So that's one thing. Another mistake that I think people often make is they kind of start off by thinking about, okay, what do I need to cut out of my diet? I'm going to cut out carbs, I'm going to cut out fat, or maybe I'm going to cut out all junk food or whatever it might be. And instead, I find it's much more helpful in the long term to focus on what do I need to add into my diet? What am I missing? Or what do I need to add in, whether that's food wise or lifestyle wise, in order to support my body and nourish my body? It's a much more positive way of approaching things, because when you cut things out, you instantly feel deprived. And, as soon as you have something that you'd kind of promised yourself you wouldn't have, then you start feeling like a failure and you start feeling guilty, and, you can end up throwing yourself off track when actually you didn't really need to completely avoid that thing in the first place. Perhaps you just needed to have a bit more of the nourishing stuff and a bit less of the processed stuff. So I think just switching the mindset around and focusing what you need to add in is really powerful.
So if you could give our listeners just one tip to help them along in their journey, what would that be?
I think I would say do things gradually, do things step by step. Because that's really another mistake that I see people make, is they really try to overhaul their lives all in one go, and they'll focus on, right, I'm going to eat more protein and cut out the junk, and I'm going to start a new exercise regime and drink more water and get to bed earlier, and many, many more things. And it's really overwhelming and very difficult to sustain for more than a few weeks, if not a few days. And it requires an awful lot of willpower. But if you can do things gradually and just make one or two changes at a time, and do it well, make sure it becomes a habit, and then move on to the next thing, then it's going to be so much easier, and you're going to see results that will last in the long term, because you're not going to be requiring so much energy and willpower to sustain all of that. And even just something as simple as drinking more water actually requires many different changes to achieve that, because it might mean that maybe you need to start carrying a water bottle around with you all day. Maybe it means that you need to swap some of your Diet Cokes for water. Maybe it means that you need to start taking a glass of water up to bed, and all these little changes that are there that are going to help you to achieve that bigger goal of overall drinking more water. We forget that there's lots of micro changes that need to happen, which is why it's so overwhelming and difficult to change many, many things at once.
Totally. That's one of the things that I talk about a lot, is in easy implementable steps, one step at a time, because I had to make a drastic change because I was having daily migraines, and that worked great for me. But normally, under normal circumstances, people are not facing stuff like that, and making those lifestyle changes bit by bit is so important to make it sustainable for people.
Yeah, 100%.
So I know that you have a masterclass that you're offering. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I have a masterclass that you can watch anytime. And it really is the kind of steps that I go through with my clients and dispelling some kind of myths and misconceptions and kind of telling you the best way to approach your weight loss journey after 40. And that's something that you can access via my website, which is louisedigbynutrition.com.
Yeah, I will put all that in the show notes and your Facebook and Instagram.
Mm.
So it's been a pleasure interviewing you, and I appreciate all of your insight. I know that's very helpful for women in that midlife journey to just really to be encouraged that they're not alone. A lot of women, the majority, are facing this also. And it's really good if you can get into a Facebook group. And I have one called the Energized Healthy Women's Club, where you're going to get some support and some good tips and solutions because, you know, it's hard to walk that journey alone. I think we all learned that during COVID. It was a very lonely time. So thank you for sharing all of your thoughts and your expertise with us, Louise.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been great talking with you.
Thanks. You have been listening to the Living Life Naturally podcast, where we're on a mission to inform, inspire, and encourage women to live their best life confidently, joyfully, and freely from what's been holding them back. For show notes and free resources, visit holistic-healthandwellness.com. And I'd be delighted if you'd follow us on socials to connect further. If you enjoyed this show, why not share it with your friends? If you found good value, chances are they will too. And of course, a 5-star review on iTunes is always greatly appreciated, as much as I appreciate you listening. So until next time, live life naturally and joyfully.